Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. Today's episode is called Code of Man. You're probably wondering what I mean by that. I labored for 30 seconds thinking about that title. I have an episode coming. Maybe I'll release it and this one as a dual batch. But it's going to be called Freedom from Religion. And it largely focuses on a recent aggregated video by Eric Dubay. He simply edited together, put very little content of his own in there, which is good. But it's about the fraud of the story of Christ, that he never existed. Something that if any of you have the courage to research and accept, you will come to the same conclusion, regardless if you admit it to another human being. But this episode's about why that information is being revealed today. A lot of people have gone down the path of trying to, anthropologically study it, and they'll find out that there's nothing there. I would say that fairly weak-minded scientists who aren't very creative, extremely left brain, have come out saying that they go in not believing and then they come out believing. And then you ask them why, and they can't really articulate it. On that note, there's a really funny story about the folks that go back in history and think they find Christianity and the Old Testament being true. You'll ask them why, and one story happens to penetrate several of their experiences, and it is the discovery of the Ark of Noah. And you'll say, if you have the courage to continue asking them questions, you say, well, why do you think that this is true? Oh, we found a boat and it matched exactly the measurements. And then you start kind of splitting hairs about cubits. And because cubits were never officially measured, there's not a stick anywhere in the universe that says this is a cubit. It's supposed to be, the average distance between an elbow and an arm and a wrist. Mankind has gotten much larger over time. That the boat always matches the measurements of what the Bible says because the unit of measurement is completely variable. Sure, well, we think a cubit's a little larger if the boat's really big. We think the cubit's a lot smaller than we thought because it's a little small. Now, for any of you who've ever studied naval fleets, studied ships, you're a sailor, you know that we, as man, bust our ass to come up with designs that work, like ships, canoes, whatever, hull displacement algorithms against water surfaces to keep objects buoyant in the center, and we do not reinvent the design. We don't, because that's a pain in the ass. So why would the boat that is rumored to have been Noah's boat, designed by God supposedly, boats aren't exactly that complex, right? God didn't say build it in the shape of a snowflake and oh my God, it's the only fucking weird ship that's shaped like a snowflake, right? No, it's a boat, and it's pretty normal. It's got a hull, and it's got a width and a length, and so the only thing that they ever find are a bunch of, studs in the ground. But they found this, the Noah's Ark's found everywhere with these bullshit photographs of them stuck up in the ice. And, of course, in the 70s and 80s, we could buy that no one could get a better shot than the shitty shots they could get. For any of you who've scanned in your old 35mm camera shots from the 80s, you will undoubtedly realize how low res those negatives were. But today, there's absolutely no excuse. If you're going to show me anything, a satellite should pick it up. And I mean photo real, super detailed. It's just bullshit. The thing is, you're finding the same boat design all over the world because that's what man had done. Man had gotten that far in ingenuity and just didn't continue innovating because the boat worked. It wasn't until the Spaniards and the British wanted to fight wars where they had needed, cannon batteries on the side of the ship, did we ever have to redesign it? But that's not what this show is about. What this show is about is why are the facts about Christianity being released right now? And they are facts. Jesus Christ never, ever existed. Really sorry for those of you who are hurt by that. It doesn't bring me any joy to say that to you. It didn't bring me any joy to find out that that was true. Now, a lot of you are going to see this from a lot of different perspectives, especially if you don't like the first thing I just said. you have sold yourself on the story of Christ, and you feel it to be blasphemous against your God, potentially you're going to go to some hell with your ever infinite loving God. You're going to go to hell if you don't acknowledge the existence of Christ, and that this is a test, and I'm an agent of the devil, and yada yada. They always say that it's tough for a man to imagine the existence of God. And I would say anyone who believes that God is wrathful is not really in that realm of finding it difficult to conceive of God. What they have done is they've made God man, and that's a sad reality. But now, if you're a truther, I want you to keep in mind that this is for you. This episode is for you. What does that mean for those of you who are not truthers? Well, there's a bunch of us trying to figure out the truth of the world because we have discovered that we are lied to constantly. That a profit margin is attached to virtually every form of information you have about the world. And when you have profit attached to news, you do not have truth. You have whatever will make people look at something and click on an advertisement. Now, when you come to grips with the fact that Christ didn't exist, but there's this gigantic church called the Catholic Church and all of its descendants, all of its different forms of churches that want to be formed out of this kernel of lie, but then continue the lie in a different interpretation, claiming to have the truth, you start to see the whole thing in a lucid psychosis. Every form of Christianity is wrong. The entire religion is based on a fictitious thing. The Tooth Fairy story for adults. All right. Well, that's a pretty good chunk of people. It is still the overwhelming minority of the world. Christianity is not remotely the biggest religion on this planet. Surprise, Americans. Islam is the biggest religion. And they have Islamic doctrines and their thing. It is safe to say, with no intent to offend anyone, that all man-made religions are completely, literally fake, literally a lie. They literally aren't true. I say literally very specifically because the symbolic truth of religions has extreme merit. Like I've always said on the show, there are beautiful things in all religions, except for perhaps the tiny percentile of religions that preach violence and infidel sort of manuscripts of killing other people. What this episode's about is the code of man. And what does that mean? I believe that the very secular, atheist or agnostic rulers of this world, the folks that handle all the money, which are those who rule the world, right? Just banking cartel families, for the lack of a better designation. They have allowed religion to sort of be the wolf out there in the herd, herding the sheep. So the wolf barks and the sheep move in a particular direction, and that's what religions have been. All religions. If they want to control India, they lean on the Hindu religion. Asia, they lean on Buddhism, etc. down the line for every region of the world. And so for them, there's a lot of benefit to hanging on to various religions. To never contradict them in any way, shape, or form. To really not get in the conversation at all, right? But there's a very interesting thing going on, which is that I believe that this conversation of Christ never having existed will continue to increase like a snowball. And there will be people that their entire lives will be furious. I mean, shouty, pointy, furious at hearing someone suggest such a thing because, again, they've built their entire life on this cornerstone that he did exist. Some people have made sacrifices because they believed he existed. I know girls that have saved their virginity in the name of Christ. So people make big, big sacrifices for this belief system. And again, in a lot of cases, it's a good sacrifice because it makes them a better person, regardless of what is true. It makes them more beautiful towards other people and towards themselves. No problem there at all. And that's why there's inherent value to distill from the intent of religions, which is what we're going to get to. The code of man is, what do we have left after religions are gone? And if we had the wherewithal and the intelligence to reset the belief in man, but distill out of every religion the most beautiful, universal, common law codes of do no harm for mankind. Because I want to suggest a couple things here. I think the time has come where the ruling class is starting to test out the agenda of getting rid of religions and supplanting them with a secular sort of, probably they would prefer an atheist view of the universe, such that money can be your God, such that just some rules on a piece of paper can be your God, but to also disembowel you, and I don't think this is possible, but disembowel from you the freedom gene that you have for sovereignty, to take away from you the understanding that you have codes in your own preferences where you do not want to be killed and you do not want things stolen from you, and therefore you understand that those things shouldn't be done to other folks. To merely understand what harm means. I think they want to eventually root out this discerning circuit in the consciousness of man, such that we are the subspecies I talked about, my episode subspecies, and we are human CPUs that will do whatever we are told, regardless of how ridiculous it is. Kill him, rape her, and we'll just do it like robots. But as I often say on this show, the problem is that if we allow reality to be dictated to us, if we are the pinball in the pinball machine or the pachinko game, then it is the pins, the bumpers, all the other things, the flippers, that tell us what to do, and we don't control it ourselves. But every single one of us deserve to control our reality. We do. We're an equal participant. The notion that someone has taught us that any one human being is over us is absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I have people come up and please see the true meaning of this statement, but I have people come up to me who know I do this show, and they listen to it, and they'll tell me how smart I am. And I mean, it's like they'll just go on and on and on. And I sit there and I listen, and it doesn't affect me much. You know, I've known I was intelligent for a long time. It's not news to me. But what will start to happen is I start to see the divide. I start to see them in a way cowered down to me, because I have this thing I do, and it bothers me because I don't want that to have happen. And so we have to figure out a way, in my opinion, to forbid that from occurring. We have to put some stakes in the ground to say, this is how we are. We are equal, not in the same exact ways. We just aren't. I think if you could find someone who's equal in the exact same way, that's a pretty cool little trick. It's like finding a doppelganger that looks just like you, right? But what I'm suggesting in this video is that I think that the ruling class are now experimenting with removing religion by starting to release the truth about religions. That's the rub. It's the truth about religions. This isn't the devil working against religion and it's a God-devil thing. No. The weird part is that, you know, God, if he or she existed, right, has created this universe or some centralized consciousness, and the truth algorithm that we're all going to be feeling when this information comes, if you have the courage to listen, is that the dude never existed. Neither did any of the other deities. Now, some prophets existed. Just people that were revered way beyond their value system, right? It'd be like someone making a religion out of this show, and oh God, this guy on Deep Thoughts, blah blah blah. I'd be in the life of Brian. For those of you who missed the Monty Python movie, I believe in 81 or 80 or whatever, called The Life of Brian. It's about Graham Chapman's character, Brian, who's just sort of a peasant, and he is mistaken for Jesus at one point, and there's a bunch of people that follow him, and he's like trying to get them to go away because he's not a Messiah. He knows he's not, can't understand these people, why they need a God. And there's a funny scene where he throws his shoe at them, his sandal. And they pick up the sandal and they think he wants them to take off their sandals. Take off one sandal to bear some burden of walking without one sandal. And then he tells them to fuck off. And then they kind of reel back from him. They go, "How should we fuck off, oh Lord?" It was like nothing he could do to get them to go away, right? And I feel like that's what's going on with the truth about Christianity. There's no brightness on the other side of truth for some Christians, right? There's nothing good about finding out that you've been had. The truth that's on the other side of that story is too painful to bear. But if you really want to say God is truth and God is love, then what you're really trying to do is get over this hump of lies. Or a bunch of pasty white guys, made up a religion to control you. And they have been. And they've been dictating if anything, a satanic code of man. Class structure. Just look at the Catholic Church. Give me a fucking break, man. They got a pope, a deity on earth that is worshipped above man, when right inside the passages of the Bible, man is created equal. Walk into a church and deal with any one of these individuals, and you will undoubtedly find a Catholic priest, a bishop, a monarch looking at you funny because you don't understand the class structure involved. How dare you? Pope drives around a bulletproof fucking car preaching that, Christianity's real and the afterlife is real and meeting God is real. Obviously, he doesn't believe in anything he's saying. It isn't funny the bulletproof bullshit happened because of the 80s assassination attempt and the guy's never driven around without it. Like nobody calms down. Weird. But now, let's say that what I'm saying is true. Just as a theoretical. And I guarantee it will happen at some point. So some, psyope agenda comes through and pretty much systematically destroys all religions by revealing the truth about them being fake. Maybe it doesn't affect baby boomers. Maybe it doesn't affect most Gen Xers. Gen Y, but they're benign. They don't care. They're indignant. Who cares? Gen Z, maybe 1995 and up. We get a group of kids that are kind of like, this has been a lie. This is crazy. So what do we do in the meantime? How do we have any type of moral compass, moral code? Well, again, like I said in my morality episode, once you look at where morality comes from, the problem is that we don't really have any institutionalized morality. Common law isn't taught in schools. How crazy is that? 40 years ago, no one worried because people were forced to go to church. Children were forced to go to Christian churches. And that was really all you needed. Because the church took care of your morality. And it actually did a fine job, in America at least. Christian morals are... I don't know how you get around, other than Second Corinthians written by Paul. It's either first or second, where he tells, women, you're supposed to shut up, and if you want to say anything in church, you talk to your man, and he decides whether or not what you have to say is of any value. On one level, I can understand why that was written, regardless, it's all fake bullshit, but because they repress women so badly. Once you do that, and you get rid of education, perhaps what anyone has to say without education would not be of any value, so the man has to evaluate to make sure it's not something that has already been covered, etc., etc. But now we have a pretty good equal playing ground in terms of education, right? Now, I mention this next thing a lot, and I apologize for those of you who listen to every episode. But this goes along with this episode. The movie, THX 1138, which virtually no one will have seen. I guarantee you, if you're a woman that's ever seen it by yourself, you are one of the most unique women on planet Earth. If you're a guy that's seen it, you're a science fiction buff, probably a George Lucas fan. But it's George Lucas's first film. He made it a student film in college, and then I guess pitched it to a studio, and they cast it with Robert Duvall and they really blew it out, and it was the most weird film. If you really watch it and try to get into a college student in his early 20s coming up with this script, and try to think about all the books he would have read, from Heinlein to Asimov, Philip K. Dick, all the books he would have read, Ray Bradbury, you wouldn't understand quite how he got such a bizarre script in his head. And I think it's interesting that it seems to be sort of a Huxley. It's almost, if you read 1984, that's one vision of the world. And then you read Huxley's Brave New World, and then you watch THX 1138. Now, somewhere in there you should watch 1975 Rollerball with James Caan, because it would be a world that would precede pretty much all those movies. But THX 1138 has a very interesting thing that happens in the movie, which is why I'm mentioning it right now. There is a point where the main character struggles with some questions. And he goes into a phone booth, and the phone booth has a picture of Christ, sort of the real medieval sort of Jewish painting of Christ. You'll recognize it when you see it. But it's just like a bus stop. Any of you have seen bus stop advertisements? They now take the inside slip of a bus stop and they put a big giant ad for the latest movie that's in there. This had a picture of Christ. It was a phone booth. You go in, it's private. You talk to an artificial intelligence, which essentially is confession. Obviously, in the movie, this artificial intelligence, just like Rollerball, is pre-programmed by this controlling government, which remains completely faceless in the entire film, which I think is brilliant. But it will curb the psychological realizations of the person talking to the machine to get back in line and be a fascist. The entire world is in this fascist socialistic society where they all wear white outfits, and they are controlled by these sort of robot bike cops with silver painted faces and cattle prods. And the interesting thing is they actually had sort of a reality TV theme inside the movie, where the entertainment that people watched at home were these cops torturing someone, beating them, whipping them, shocking them. Why do I mention that one more time? In that model, you have on, say, the left, you, with your organized religions, as they've been taught to you over the years and revised over the years. Now remember, Catholic Church is revising their religion beyond belief, right? My entire life, gays have been forbidden to exist in the Catholic Church, even though Catholic priests and Catholic nuns are all gay by some huge percentage, 98% gay. That's where people stored their children when they realized that they were gay in the past, that when they ended up serving God, they are forbidden from marrying. That solves the problem of them not wanting to be with the opposite sex. You ever wonder why that never made any sense? But they are compromising every single thing they've ever thought. Now they're talking about agendas like global warming, things that are unrelated to God. But they're revising that religion as fast as possible because I believe personally on the upper scale level, they've been notified that the clock is ticking on their religion. And if they don't carry the agenda of the secular bankers, they're gone. And so the Pope, with all their power structure, is trying to revise it to say, oh, no, don't worry, it's a big ship, it's a big Titanic, it's a big aircraft carrier. We have to be going the opposite direction is what you're saying. That's fine. We're a bunch of sellout shills that don't believe in God anyway, so we'll turn this boat around, but it's going to take a while. And so there's a bunch of fine-tuning going on, right? But let's say on the left we have them. And on the right we have a bunch of bankers that are very secular, meaning no belief in God. How could they believe in any creator and behave the way they behave? It's, for me, it is a level of infinite ignorance that baffles my mind. Perhaps they have a different belief system. Now, a lot of us think that they very actively worship Satan simply because the doctrine matches their intellect, it matches the abuse that they've suffered in their lifetime, it matches the history of their family, and so they feel like, well, we weren't invited to heaven, so we're going to go with the other guy. And boy, Are the drinks a lot stronger over here? But now here's the thing. Those are paradigms of thought, right? Organized religion is a paradigm of thought. And what I think is funny is a lot of my Christian friends will very quickly dismiss their beliefs in saying, I'm not part of organized religion, but I have my beliefs, which in any realm is a paradox and an oxymoron if there ever was one. Then you have folks that don't believe anything, and you have varying levels of calmness. You know, I've got some friends of mine that are atheists or secular or agnostic or whatever, and they don't know. And they don't spend a lot of time saying anything negative, but then I have my friends who do. Not too many. But the thing is that if we always talk about consciousness on this show and the fact that we exist and how do we know we exist? I think therefore I am, right? It is my belief that the unified theory of the universe is the most simple thing that could ever be explained on a piece of paper, regardless of what it is. It is not a gigantic Albert Einstein equation on a blackboard that simplifies into a tiny little E equals MC squared. I don't buy it. And I don't think that God is that complex. Powerful, yes. Infinitely detailed, but in its principal operation, its physics, its mathematics, that keep it going, that keep God doing what God does. I think we're talking about a very beautiful, simple being. And it is the simplicity of God that man struggles to understand, not the complexity of God. And so here we are, sort of stuck in the middle between this fight between organized religions of any kind and the secular bankers that use money to control us. But here's the thing. We all know about law of the jungle, right? You remove religion and you get law of the jungle if morality goes with that religion. Because in the most secular school system, there is no morality. There is no moment in class where someone says, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet. Those aren't taught anywhere other than to maybe look over the fence and say, well, those are those Christian weirdos and this is what they believe. That's be the only place you would ever hear the basic principles of life, the code of man. So, here's the thing. You all know that the majority of your friends do not want to participate in the operation of mankind, meaning they do not want to sit around losing time from their incredibly important Super Bowl playoffs to determine how to behave, how to think about each other. They don't want to think about that stuff. They want it to just be automatic. Just like, when you learn how to drive a car, you don't think about it anymore, right? On one level, it makes complete sense that no one should be burdened with the fundamentals of life, especially after they've already mastered the fundamentals of life. But we have new generations being born every day, and then what do we do about them? What do we do about them? How do we protect our kids, our grandkids, and so on and so forth? Because if we don't step up to the plate to take control of this reality, guess who's going to step up to the plate? One of these other paradigms. And one of them's already embedded, called religion. Regardless of where your kid ends up. Hey man, Steve Jobs became a Hare Krishna, for God's sakes. So did Russell Brand. So it doesn't matter what area you come from, your kid can fall into any religion on planet Earth. And there's nothing wrong with those other religions. I'm just saying we need to own the code of man as man, and we need to talk about it, and we need to develop it. And I think that the beautiful thing is that this is the quickest, fastest, easiest job we as mankind will ever be burdened with. The code of man. It's not that hard, is it? In fact, we've got the answers right in front of our face. Between the Ten Commandments, Magna Carta, United States Constitution as it was originally drafted. And I realize they didn't make provisions for women in slavery, but let's just assume that mankind is raceless. That we have one race, the human race, and that all things that apply to one man apply to all men, period. Men being a unisex designation. But now here's what's really fascinating to me. The rumors about Christianity, which are nothing but rumors, is that this guy existed, died, and it took 380 to 600 years to really start writing down anything about what happened. Can you imagine that story about your grandfather's fish he caught in the pond going 380 years before anyone wrote the fucking story down, how accurate that would be? But in many points in history, when mankind was being repressed by others, the code of conduct, the information that we needed to preserve as mankind, was passed covertly from man to man. But we had to secretly pass it in some cases because, the people that we allowed to be over us, above us, not equal to us, would persecute us if we so much as learned how to escape their grasp, right? Well, the beautiful thing about the code of conduct for man is it is extremely simple and super powerful. Let me give you an example. You're a soldier of any nation anywhere on planet Earth, and you have adopted the secret code of man, which has very few rules about it. But the very first thing that we always say is do no harm, right? Now, do no harm really gets at killing someone else, hurting someone else, or stealing from someone. That heartfelt thing. That's harm. When you steal someone's stuff, it's harm. The Ten Commandments actually had a really interesting one, which has taken me decades to fully understand its brilliance. But the other one is don't covet another man's wife. And wow, that's the metaphysical world being policed, because it will lead to the other realm of doing harm to someone. If you were to covet someone else's wife, it will lead to no good, because eventually if you try to woo her away from him and she takes your invitation, you hurt his heart. You perhaps hurt a family with a mother and a father, or it might lead to a dispute where there's death involved or injury because you're fighting for this woman. So that it's beautiful how they figured out that there was a physical world that needed to be policed and a metaphysical world that needed to be policed, which is interesting. But back to our war analogy. Every nation builds a big army. They build a big army, and they go along with it because there's perhaps a financial gain for it. But let's just say that the code of man spreads all over the world. Do no harm, do no harm, do no harm. Every iteration of do no harm. And man buys into it because man's sick and tired of this war. The ruling class think they can keep this chapter of war going and going and going. It's ridiculous how long they think they can keep this going. It's 16 years, 15 years into this war against terror, and they still think we give a fuck at the end of the day. Unbelievable. But now let's say that all the soldiers of the world buy into this idea of the code of man on the same day. It took several months, maybe a couple years to get it to spread. And now the commanding officers, the COs, come down and say, well, it's time for you to deploy and harm other people. Now, on one level, they look at the deployment and they go, well, this is our indigenous land. We will deploy here. If that's what you want us to do, it doesn't harm anybody. It's us physically existing on the world in some place. But the second you tell me to pull a trigger on somebody, I'm not going to do it. Regardless if they roll over me, I'm not rolling over them. Now, obviously, everyone's shouting what someone will roll over you, and I understand that the analogy is a little ridiculous. But what if this primitive idea were to spread? And believe me, what do you think the academic requirements are for an individual to understand do no harm? Do you really need 140 IQ to understand do no harm? I'm going to suggest you don't. I'm going to suggest you need just a fleeting level of consciousness to understand that you don't want anyone to harm you. Anytime you see children behaving badly, it is typically because some asshole has treated them badly to begin with. Now, is there any value in me making an episode talking about that insanely idealistic formula of man pulling his head out of his ass and getting into world peace? I don't know. I just know that if no one tries, if everyone buys into that catchphrase, that it's an idealistic phrase, an idealistic notion that will never happen, guess what will happen? the inverse will happen. And it will happen with all due haste. So I'm throwing this episode out there just to see if something catches fire. And again, I'm probably saying it horribly, and you could probably say it a hell of a lot better. I started thinking about this show, and I thought, what's interesting about it is I don't invite my family and friends to sit on the patio with me during this show. So from an outside perspective, from a general relativity standpoint, I'm sort of like your crazy old guy up in a cave somewhere. I'm in some backyard on the top of a mountain, and I just have my opinions, man, and you come and you listen, and obviously you're going to think I'm nuts in some areas, you're going to think I'm wise in some areas, you're going to take some of it and apply it to your life, and others you're just going to, maybe won't even get what I'm saying because I'm doing a horrible job talking about it, putting it into words. But this is sort of the way we used to educate and share information 2,000 years ago. The hermits of the world sat and thought about things, because whatever their life allowed them to do so. People would visit the hermits and sort of get this year's codex of knowledge from them, and they would come down and decipher the world. And sometimes the hermit, being isolated, would not have anything to share of any value. Now I do participate in the world very heavily. I try to observe as much as I possibly can. But you need to take this idea and apply your genetics to it, in my opinion. When someone says that mankind shouldn't have any religion because it's dangerous and it hurts people, it's hard to argue with that. So perhaps we remove, again, the word religion and we put in code. If you're super technical, it would be protocol, right? But I think code's nice and sweet. How do you spread such a thing? How do you do it? Well, obviously, the easiest way you can spread it is to your children and to your grandchildren and to any child. I can't imagine a parent complaining that you're teaching their kid not to do harm to other people, regardless of who you bump into. But don't be the goddamn creep in the mall that grabs a child to say this to somebody. Once I was in a mall once, and it's like this suit store with my father, and he was trying to buy a suit. And this old man, I'd imagine he's in his mid to late 50s. He pulls me aside in this department store. When I think about this, it just blows my mind. And he asked me about, my belief in Christ and all this other stuff. And of course, I had no clue what he was talking about. And I can't remember how old I was, but I remember the moment like it was yesterday. But he puts his arm around me and he tells me to, pray with me. And he's saying some prayer about saving my soul. Of course, in his brain, he's doing the work of God. And then I remember somehow trying to tell my father what happened or my mother what happened. And they were looking for him. I don't think they ever found him. It was just really weird. We don't want to be those kind of people. But the other huge one is to try to do it by example. And, am I talking about turning the other cheek? Am I talking about someone breaks into your house and they're going to rape your wife and you're like, I will do no harm? No, I'm not talking about that. If anything, that gives us a chance to weed out the douchebags that are never going to buy into the policy in the first place. So we'll thin the herd one bullet at a time. I'm very serious about that. If we have sociopaths on this planet that cannot be rehabilitated, all right, you better buy a gun because you're going to need it. It was interesting. There was a case here in the United States where I believe in Florida, they loosened their gun policies where you could actually sidearm or something like that. And an old man went to the movie theater and a young kid was, he's in his 20s or something, but he's being the dick and looking at a cell phone right during the movie, lighting up his whole cell phone screen. And the kid, the old man went down and said, please turn off your phone. We're watching a movie here. We all paid to be here and you're disrupting the experience. And of course, the punk-ass kid told the old man to go fuck himself. And so then violence ensued. The young kid, I guess, came after the old man, is the way the story goes. Even the eyewitnesses, I think, corroborated this. And the old man pulled the gun out and blew that motherfucker away. Now it was a cell phone in a theater. Wasn't exactly breaking into your house and trying to rape the old man's wife. But there was this law about standing ground, and you pull out the gun, you brandish the weapon, and you say, "Stand down, don't come after me." And the kid probably had no idea that you could have a gun in a movie theater. Thought the old man was joking or something, but had his bravado. Watched too much MMA. He's dead. The kid's dead, and the old man went to jail. So in one fell swoop, even though it's a horrible example, we have an entitled little pricky kid who's gone from this world. Obviously, it wasn't a crime punishable by death. What would have happened had he started beating up the old man? Old man get a black eye, whatever. But the old man, being a trigger-happy cowboy, is in jail for the rest of his life. Probably will die in prison. So we weeded him out of the game too. That's a horrible example of what might actually end up occurring between the people that can't buy into the code of man, which is to do no harm. Do no harm means keep your goddamn cell phone off in the movie theater and don't go running up to someone with your gun super excited to show the world how you can pull a trigger. Both of them failed the test. Both of them are out of society, either by way of death or incarceration, right? But living by example, I think, is mega powerful. Mega powerful. I've been in a lot of situations in my lifetime, not a ton, but I would say more than a few, where, and I've talked about this once before, I believe, in season 1, but where shit's going down in a public place. My friends are involved, or random strangers are involved, and usually alcohol has something to do with it in most cases. People are impaired. They're about to throw down on each other. It would be, in some cases, a total slaughter between two people because one guy is extremely powerful and the other one's not. But, of course, alcohol makes everyone feel like they're equal. And I have stepped in, assessed the situation very quickly, and in, I think, all cases, been able to calm everyone down, separate them, make each one of them feel like they've been heard, to explain to them in language that they understand with their level of sentient consciousness, impaired or otherwise, that it's not worth it. And it's a very physical thing. It's a very physical thing. It's a, I have a frequency that's very calm. I just do. And so what ends up happening is typically I will lay hands on them in a particular way that is not aggressive, that is warm. And they're men, right? So another dude, a lot of people, it's really weird. I'm just freestyling this in my brain right now, but I freestyled everything. But, I think that men, we don't touch each other. We just don't. And I'm not sure I want to encourage anyone to do so, but it sometimes just gets to the point where, they're in bad relationships or marriages where there's no hugging or whatever. They just feel like nobody fucking cares about them. And it's sort of that underlying edge of frustration. Maybe life is kicking their ass. Maybe they know their marriage sucks. Maybe they don't like their job. Maybe they don't like how much weight they have gained over the years. I had one situation like that. A kid from my high school got massively obese and was having a fight with one of his best friends who was still extremely athletic. And it wasn't about obesity, I don't think, but I'm not sure. But it was really about my buddy, I think, coming up to him saying, "Dude, why are you drinking so much? This is crazy. You're not like this. You never were like this. 20 years after high school, you weren't like this. And now you're 25 years later, you're hanging out at this bar and everyone says you're constantly plastered and you're the sweetest guy on planet Earth. You've never been in a fight in your life. Why are you trying to fight me? Because I'm trying to help you out." And, of course, he was impaired. Both of them were impaired, trying to help each other. But they were at a point where, one of them didn't want to have a fight at all. But he was the guy that could have knocked the other guy out with a single punch. And the one that would have gotten his ass kicked had just basically said, "Fuck this. I don't mind getting my ass kicked, but I'm not taking shit from anybody because nobody knows my struggle." And I certainly didn't know his struggle for sure. But the first thing I did was pull the guy off that was willing to go outside. I just grabbed his shoulder, which surprised him. Not hard, but firm. And I looked at him, I said, "Dude, I'll take care of this. Just do me a favor, go outside. I'll be out there in 2 seconds. And so he goes outside. And I think it's very specific that I had to say, I'll be out there in a few seconds. Meaning I will care. This issue isn't over. We will continue to discuss this issue because it is important to you. If I said, stop talking about this issue, what you have brought up doesn't matter, he wouldn't have left because he wants the issue to resolve. He wants to know his buddy's going to be okay. But he's in no mental condition to assist the process, right? But my buddy did me a favor, man. He turned around and walked right outside. And he's got people outside begging him to come outside as well. So there was more than just my pressure to get the first dude out of the realm. And he wasn't as intoxicated as the other guy. Now here's the thing. Both these gentlemen know me. The guy I'm asking to go outside, I know him a lot better. I hung out with him as a kid. I hung out with his brother. I know them, and I asked him to go outside. So he was willing to do me a favor, sort of, I think, subconsciously. Because he knows I'm cool and I'm going to take care of it. But the kid I turned to the left, he and I were friends only in grade school. But we never had any negative situations happen. But now here's the thing. I turned to the guy who's fully intoxicated, feeling attacked. Feeling attacked about something he can't change, which is the fact that he's intoxicated. He knows he has an addiction to do so. He has probably gained 150, 200 pounds beyond his normal weight. He's not that tall of a guy. And the last thing he wants to do is lament about his defects that he is well aware of. No one needs to remind him, as they say. And so the next thing I have to say to him is the opposite of what he's expecting me to say, but the exact thing he needs to hear me say. Which is, sorry about that. Sorry about that, you know. So-and-so loves you, man. How you doing? How you doing today? For all this crap happened, how are you doing otherwise, right? And the guy was literally like about to shout at me saying, I don't want to hear your shit either. I don't want to hear you tell me I got to fucking change and da-da-da-da. But I didn't give him any of that. I just chopped it off and said, no more of this talk about relative bullshit. Let's enjoy a conversation for the first time in probably 30 years plus. Or because we didn't really spend much time in high school, probably got 35 years. And so we just small talked very quickly. And he would ebb back and forth between the conversation with me and talking about the guy outside. And I just kept dismissing it. Just don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. And the funny thing was I sort of said, well, that guy's drunk. You know, insinuating that he wasn't. Well, he's drunk. That's why he's saying that. Don't worry. Believe me, he loves you to death. And that's sort of what he needed to hear. And that's using a little bit of wisdom from myself to understand the human condition, to understand what's at stake, to understand what was being said. And believe me, I walked up on that situation. I did not watch it manifest. I walked up to it, and I had maybe 2 seconds to figure out what the hell was going on to keep, blows from going back and forth. And I think that the bigger guy would have absorbed any sort of physical outburst from the first guy, from the smaller guy. But in the end of the conversation, I just... I grabbed the other guy's shoulder and I said, man, it's just really good to see you, man. I said, I'll be back next round in 5 years here from our reunions that we'd have for high school. And I said, let's talk a lot more, right? And I believe, to be honest, now that I think about this, this was the 20th anniversary of my high school. And by the 25th, he was sober as could be. And I think that he was participating in the reunion. I won't identify him by what he was doing, but he was not drinking alcohol. That was what was cool. Still a large guy, but really just having a good time. And he was doing a good job DJing the music from our era, and so people were giving him props, and it was just great. And the other two, they never had any disputes whatsoever, and it was good. So that completes like a third iteration of the code of man. We teach our kids, we live by example, and we do what we can to use our wisdom to diffuse any moment where two people or one person is about to violate the code. And it's really desperate measures for desperate times. You know, these two guys were intoxicated, so it was not going to be an academic experience for either one of them. It was a raw, man-on-man thing where it was like, dude, look at my eyes, man. This isn't worth it. Don't worry about it. And the funny thing is that eye contact was major. Eye contact was, you look at this second dude for sure. Well, both of them, you know, it was like, you know, I'm hoping that my eyes said, you know, I'm going to handle this, and you know it's not worth it. And look, we're all seeing each other for the first time in 20 years. You know, not the first time, but we haven't seen each other for 10 years. Isn't this way better that we have a good time, you know? And by the way, the next day everyone bowled off. But you know what I'm saying, right? But it's going to require effort. And I fear that effort is the greatest kryptonite to mankind at this point in time. Effort is really interesting when it comes to this. I'm not sure why effort is such a dying breed. You know, I think it's actually, I shouldn't say that. I think it's actually part of the awakening snowball. People are willing to exert a tremendous amount of effort to get truth into their mind. But think about it. If you made it this far and you're a Christian and you believe in Christ, you are doing me a solid. And if you want to go research anything I've asserted in this, which is to suggest that the story of Christ is nothing but a myth, regardless of what you've been told, that's going to be a lot of effort. And it will be effort. It actually won't take you a lot of time to find the scientific connections, and not science with a capital S, but, you know, historical anthropological evidence that no historian ever wrote about Christ forever. And even historians that were, like I said in the other episode, assigned to discussing the spiritual development of the area of Rome, you know, they would have talked about Christ. They would have talked about a rumor of Christ. Even if he was a cartoon character back in those days, they would have talked about it. And probably talked about it from, I don't know if this guy's real or not, but there's this dude they're talking about called Christ. I don't know if he was real. I never met him. But they would have documented that people believed in him, and no one did. And there's this whole collection of historians that are collecting documents written in this era. As they find them and translate them, they look for passages. They try to figure out who these individuals were and whether or not they would have documented something like this. And we're over 115 documents now, written right in that era, no mention of it. But think about the effort it will take you to personally go back into your shelves, like I always say, and take stuff off the true shelf and put it on the false shelf. And then you have to, you know when you, let's say you're at your house, and there's been an item on a shelf of some sort for a really, really long time, right? And you move it off the shelf, and you realize that the sun has been shining on that shelf for 10, 20 years plus. And the paint is fresh and perfect underneath the item, and it's bleached all around the item. And you go, oh shit, I'm going to have to repaint the shelf, because there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to get rid of this difference in paint oxidization and bleaching, right? That's sort of what's going to happen in your mind when you move something off a shelf that's been there your entire life. There's this sort of stain in your mind. Damn. How old am I when I finally started believing in something more truthful? The reason why I make this particular episode different than the rest is that when I talk about that stain on the shelf, a lot of you will believe we went to the moon until you research it on your own and you realize, geez, this is ridiculous. This was a ridiculous assertion. Science with a capital S is working overtime to craft some sort of believable story as to how that could happen, now that we all know the science of how to get there, or at least the overwhelming preponderance of lack of invention that would have gotten us there, right? But you can move that moon mission thing off your shelf, and it doesn't leave quite the stain that religion does, because you do not live your life, your code of existence, your morals are not dictated by anything related to the Big Bang Theory necessarily, the moon, all that stuff, global warming. But religion is a fabric topic, a fundamental topic to how we exist on this planet, right? And getting rid of that is massive. And it requires more work, more effort to supplant that with something that's there. Now, even the people that say that Christ didn't exist realize that the moral fabric and moral code of man exists within religion. But the more you step back from it, you start realizing those who control and sustain those religions do not buy into them at all. There's no way that any pope that has existed for the last 40 years has ever believed in God. And that's a fact. That is a complete fact. One, they're afraid to die. They put bulletproof glass all over their little pope mobiles. Well, if you believe in God, then you should believe that he has your best interests at heart. He's going to take care of you in the afterworld. And what pope has been young in the last 40 years? I mean, really, which pope has not lived a full life before he became pope? Such that if you died being the pope because you got a bullet through the heart, if you truly believe in God, then you are simply a paladin that was taken down in war. You're a priest warrior that is fighting for the belief in God, fighting for the principles of God by which you believe, and dying in his service would merely anoint you to God. That's not how they behave, is it? Preaching equality between men, but then forming a hierarchical class structure called the Catholic Church is insane. It just contradicts the principles of the teachings. You can't have both. But historians and theologians and people that study myths of the world, they realize that there's a code within Christianity as well as all religions. Okay, I'm not familiar with all religions, so I tend to fixate on Christianity, like I always say. But we do not want to go back to Law of the Jungle. If you read Huxley's book, A Brave New World, you will see this new world that is devoid of morality. That's a big deal. So we need a code of man. And a lot of people get in trouble on the internet constantly. Well, they get trouble in real life and they film it and they put it on the internet where they're trying to make a stance, or make a stand, I should say, take a stance with police officers, quoting common law, quoting laws that are actually on the books, where police officers that do not have this knowledge are kind of looking at them going, what the hell are you talking about? You know, what's weird is they take such a stance with these police officers that to the police officer doesn't have the education. They're, as far as the police officer is concerned, they have a psychopath on their hands. They have someone who's so unpredictable and chaotic to their brains that they're like, I extra want to apprehend you, and I feel like I really need handcuffs on you to symbolically calm the chaos that they don't understand. And so they get extra in trouble physically, and some of them get shot and killed trying to propagate this stuff. You know, it's not, you know, I salute in some ways people who do that, but in the other realm, I'm like, I would advise them to do it differently. I would advise them to start at the self, then take it to family, and you know, maybe through example, take it to work. You know, a listener made a good point, because I always talk about the self, family, and work as the three hemispheres of existence. And someone said, well, there's a fourth, and it's God. And I think that I've been fairly clear in my opinion, and I don't mind having a fourth. That's fine if you want to take that outside. For me, self is God. Your relationship with your Creator is self, is something that you analyze when you are by yourself, when you feel completely isolated, even for 5 minutes. You have a whole family of 5 kids or whatever, and your wife's kicking ass and taking names too, and or your husband or whatever, and you got a moment to yourself. You're driving in a car by yourself, you're at the house by yourself, the kids are at school, whatever the case might be. It is that moment where you realize that you have a solitude moment with yourself. And I want to remind you guys, again, if you made it this far, I feel like I'm talking to the absolute devout listeners, and I appreciate you beyond your wildest dreams. Season 1 has a lot of great episodes that are going to seem a little bit like self-help episodes. But let me tell you, like I have an episode on self. Who's going to click on that with that title? Unless you know that everything else I say has interest to you, has a twist to it, some wisdom in it that I got from someone else or I was able to distill from reality. If you're into this and you're into improving yourself, try to go and look at all the episodes. I have a few episodes about screenwriting, and they don't get watched very much, which I completely understand, right? Because you may not have any interest. But let me ask you this. If you think you don't have interest in screenwriting, let me ask you, have you ever tried to listen to anyone talk to you about screenwriting? Because if you haven't, you may have a story within you that you didn't know. Something that could enlighten all of us, something that could just be fun to watch. I mean, you know, if anything, if you're able to write a story that makes me think about who I am as an individual, by the time I walk out of the movie theater, and I don't care if it's an anti-plot, crazy, weird-ass script that felt like it didn't have a plot, but at the end you made me look at who I am as a human being because one of your characters had incubated up a situation which mirrors my life in some way, believe me, that is probably one of the most valuable films that could ever be made. Whether it be a short story that's just released on the internet, or a true full-blown film, or a book you self-publish. By the way, guys, self-publishing is super-duper easy. How do you think David Icke gets his books made and Eric Dubay gets his books made, at least at the beginning? You write a book, you download a template about how to format the book. I recommend Apple's Pages if you want to save yourself hours and hours of time playing with Microsoft Word. But you upload the PDF, you upload your cover art, your front, your back, your spine. You can create your own publishing company. You just make it up on the spot, right? And you can get it published. And what ends up happening is you can't get the contract with Barnes & Noble or any of those big hitters unless you're really fortunate and you know a publishing agent that's still got some juice. What I found out was publishing agents are disappearing. But if your book, you can promote it on your own little blog. You can give it to other bloggers. You can put it on your Facebook page. If you say something interesting, people will buy your book and read it. It doesn't have to be long. It could be 50 pages. You literally buy the books from this company. They publish them beautifully bound. You can get them as ornately bound as you want. And one, you can just get a copy for yourself. You only pay like a couple $100 to set up the book on the other side. And then you can have one published and send it to yourself. So imagine for like $300 you can have a bound book on your shelf that you wrote. And if anybody wants to buy it, you get it for nothing. You know, like you can get a book for about 430 pages or so. You can get a book bound to you softback for about $5 a copy. And if you can sell it for $10, $15, that's profit. That's just your mind share spreading to other people, and you make a little bit of money on the side. And believe me, after you get 2 or 3 or 4 of these things written, regardless of how long they are, people will take notice of you. Publishers will take notice of you. Maybe after you write 4 or 5, you make a bound book of all of those into one big series, and now it's a big, thick book that people want to publish. Who knows, right? But this is a great subject to write about. This is a great theme to embed in anything you are creating, whether it be art, conversation with someone. We got to own the code of man. I know you feel me. I hope this episode was at least interesting. And again, I apologize to those of you I might be frustrating with my claims and beliefs and the lack of this character Jesus, right? Obviously, there's some beautiful wisdom carried from previous religions into his story that we need to hang on to. But I think the code of man is pretty damn simple. If you haven't been already, go to deepthoughtsradio.com. The latest episode is on the front, just plays like a video. If you come into it from your phone, it will not play automatically. You have to click the link, and there's YouTube link, Facebook link, and the RSS feed for your podcast reader right on the front page. The icons just drop right in front of your font and click it. If you're watching this show, then effort is something that you're very accustomed to. If you're watching this show, and I don't mean to reverse accolade myself, right? I'm not trying to pump myself up by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're watching a show like this, to this minute, you are the people that are changing the world. You are the hope for our future. And there's no interpretation to that statement. There's no minimization that can be applied. You are the hope for this planet. Because you're willing to listen to someone else's opinion this far. I trust you have the intellect and the power to re-articulate this to other people. Realize that even if you don't talk like I talk, you think, oh man, I could never say this kind of stuff. I can't even remember what he says exactly at the end of the episode, but I like what he said. Believe me, your voice has a paramount value. In fact, if you can simplify what I say, then you're going to reach a bigger audience than what I'm reaching, and you will be more powerful than me every day of your life. Every day of your life. So, you know, just consider me the hermit in the backyard. You're coming to visit me. Maybe you take some of it. Maybe you don't. Maybe you completely disagree with me. But regardless, if I've agitated your thoughts, then you're affirming what you believe, and it becomes an amazingly wonderful thing for both of us, right? Please subscribe if you haven't. Like this video if you dig it. And if you can, if you're moved by any of this stuff, positive or negative, leave your feelings and your interpretations in the comments down below. Because I'm telling you, you can, if you think you're learning something from me, like I always say, read the comments and you will learn as much, if not more, from just the comments from people and their amazing, beautiful experiences and how they've dealt with hardships and how they've found wonderful solutions to problems. Far in excess of my recommendations, right? So, again, I appreciate you. Take care of yourself and someone else. And I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts, folks. Over now.